Let's go over page by page of the app to help you understand how the app works. We're starting on the input page. The top, you have the arrow build that we're working with, the point type, which we'll get into later, the name of your build, and you can make this as long as you want. Below, we have an option to build with pin gaps. If left off, you'll build with launch velocity and arrow parameters. We can set our density right here, reading the onboard pressure sensor of the phone, as well as our current temperature and our dew point temperature to factor in humidity. Arrow launch velocity / speed. We have arrow mass, outside diameter of our arrow, total arrow length, tip to tail, number of fletchings. We have fletching length, fletching height, and the fletching angle or offset angle of our vanes. Using those input parameters, the app will then build all the relevant data with those inputs. If you don't have a chronograph though, let's talk about how to do that. We're starting out on the input page, and we're going to talk about building data without chronograph speeds. On the input page, select our build we're interested in, and we'll toggle this toggle under our build name that says use marks or pin gaps from sight to generate data. We toggle this over, we're going to measure our arrow tip to tail, and then we're going to click the blue button to generate data with marks. We'll choose whether these are sight marks or pin gap measurements, whether we do know a velocity, distance in yards or meters, and again, we have air density to calculate here during our sight-in. So let's use pin gaps as the first reference here. We'll select our sight. I'm going to choose a vertical rail sight, maybe a black gold or a UV slider. We take 2 measurements on our bow, the center of peep to center of arrow at full draw, and the center of peep to our pins at full draw. Arrow mass, and then we need to choose 3 distances. We recommend starting at 30 and doing nothing less than that. So 30, 50, and 70 yards are 3 great distances for most archers. What you will do is you will find where on your sight, by rolling your slider, does your sight hit on at 30 yards. You'll then make a reference mark on your vertical rail. You'll do the same at 50 and 70 yards. Then you're going to measure the gaps between those distances. So in box 1 here, the gap between distance 1 and distance 2 is the gap between 30 and 50 yards on the sight rail. For curved sights like a spot hog, you're going to want to mark on a piece of tape or something you can remove from the sight, because you need to lay this tape on a flat surface to get an accurate vertical measurement that the sight has moved. This will give you the arc length, which is really critical for this measurement. You do that for both the distance between 1 and 2 and 1 and 3. So you can see here, you want to be very precise on these distances such that they're as accurate as possible. I'm going to enter 2 random values here. Let's say 0.25 and maybe 0.7. Let's see if we get a solution. Great. So we did get a solution. Sometimes you'll see that there's no solution for the value you inputted. What this means is based on your arrow weight in the 2 values and distances you've selected, there's no solution unless the arrow was speeding up at some point in the arrow path. We run our calculation, we get a solution. This gives us a ballistic coefficient and an arrow velocity estimate based on our inputs. We can then save these values, and we're all set up. All of our data is now generated from these marks. Hey, Lucas here. I wanted to talk a little bit about setting your elevation or density in Pro Archery Ballistics. So under the More tab, you're going to find two options here. You can enter an elevation number, and this will use an average density for that elevation as the density value for your arrow. The more accurate way is to use the input ambient conditions. This will calculate the exact density at the time you're building the sight tape. If we get that sight end density right, then we can use other features of the app, such as the shoot for calculator, to compensate for those changes in density throughout the day. So don't forget, the advanced page has two ways to calculate your density. Check them out, see which one you like the most. Let's talk about the table page. So at the top, again, like all the other pages, we have our build that we're interested in. I'm going to select my TAC build, which is build 1 for me. We have a blue button to update the table, just in case the data is not refreshing properly. We have a 0 or our shot distance selection. This is used for a reference for our drop column. We can choose whether we want yards or meters, and every orange selection is selectable. So I can change the columns of data to the data that I'm interested in. I like time to target and drop, or maybe penetration and drop, depending on what I'm looking at. I can also select momentum, energy, and velocity as well. So let's look at the drop column. I can also turn it to select 1, so all I see is drop. This 0 distance we selected above, let's say 50 yards. This makes our drop 0 at 50 and calculates the arrow path relative to that being 0. So in this case, our arrow starts at 0 at the bow, climbs to 12 inches, and drops back to 0 at 50 yards. So I need a 12-inch window to shoot a 50-yard target with this particular setup. I also know that if I'm 5 yards short or 5 yards long, or my target is 5 yards shorter or 5 yards long, that if it's short, I'll hit 4 inches high, and if it's long, I'll hit 5 inches low. Very useful information when you're considering your effective range if you have a target that is at an unknown distance. Penetration values are also very interesting. These are estimates, and they are based on the data that we input on the input page. This is when we select our point type to broadhead, scroll down, and enter all the relevant broadhead data to our setup. This will then calculate our penetration values based on that setup. There are default values in these fields, so you'll always have penetration estimates here, but note, most accurately, fill in for your broadhead you're using. Let's go on to the next pages of the app. Why Pro Archery Ballistics? We have a 43 line of sight downhill shot, 15-degree angle. Rangefinder told us 42.3 on an angle compensation. Actually, it's about 41.6 when you factor in gravity like you should. That's why you should use Pro Archery Ballistics. Let's talk about the shoot for calculator in the app. At the top, our build selection. Next, English or metric units. And then whether we're using a sight mark style sight or we want distance marks. For sight marks, you can select pre-programmed sights, target sights that are out there, or enter a special detail for your own sight that you may be using. We need a sight radius and a peep to arrow measurement, as well as a reference mark that you would sight in at the time. Then you can use the shot conditions to calculate the shoot for mark and wind drift as appropriate. Let's flip this over to the distance marks. You'll notice that we have an input ambient conditions. This, when pressed, allows us to calculate the exact density at the time of shooting. This density is referenced to our sight-in density that we used when we set up our marks on the input page. It's also referencing our sight tape, which uses the sight-in density as well. So when we have a density difference, the shoot for calculator will tell us at what yard we should be aiming for based on the current conditions, including wind, shot angle, and more. So for example here, let's say we have an 80-yard shot. On flat ground, with a 10-mile-an-hour wind coming from about a 2 o'clock right to left. because we're shooting a 0 angle, the uphill and downhill doesn't matter, but we're going to input our 2 here. So we have a 10-mile-an-hour wind at our 2 o'clock. So that is going to result in us needing to add 2 yards to our shot. And maybe we have some density differences here as well. But we need 2 yards to our shot, and we're going to have a drift of 2.6 inches to the left for our particular arrow setup here. This is a very fast, thin tack arrow. Likewise, if the wind was coming more of a tailwind at like a 4 o'clock right to left, we would take off a couple yards. Now it's 78.3 yards, and our wind drift is 2.36 inches to the left. We can do that for a 9 o'clock wind, 3.5 inches to the right, an 8 o'clock wind, which is 7.3 yards and 2.365 inches to the right, and so on. This accounts for both headwind, tailwind, crosswind configurations to let you know what our shoot forward distance should be and an approximate wind drift based on the geometry of your arrow that you inputted at the start.
Till it breaks, champions of fate. The future will be ours, and we don't have a doubt about it. We don't have a doubt about it. No, never had a doubt about it. No! Take a look and see how far we come, and we ain't even close to being done. We're only getting started.
We're on the sight tape page of the app here. Let's go over it. The top, our build selection that we're interested in. Next, yards or meters. Our sight selection, vertical rail is the first option, which includes all your vertical rail type sights, your black golds, your UltraView, your Excel, CB, many of the CBE sights, and more. If your sight tape is on a curved surface, that's when you need a special sight tape. And you would select one of the options below. If your sight is not supported, reach out. We'd love to get it added. You'll make sure that your distance pin to center of peep while at full draw and your center of arrow to center of peep at full draw are accurate. That's your sight radius and your peep to arrow measurement. We then have a scale adjustment here. This scale adjustment, when changed, affects the on-screen 1-inch scale. Change this value until the scale measures 1 inch. This is critical such that the on-screen representation of the sight tape is correct. That on-screen representation is used to generate our images for the D30 label printer and the Epson label printer. So make sure that that's accurate. Below that, you have color options, color wheels that you can select various customization colors on your sight tape. These are printed when it comes to our full printout that you would do at a desktop printer. However, the label printers are black and white, so just know that those customizations only work on desktop printers. Below that, we have the ability to add a custom mark to our printout or use this as a reference. For example, if I wanted to know where I should slide my sighter when I have a 5-yard shot, or a 2-yard shot, or maybe a 3.5-yard shot, or a 3-yard shot, I can do that here and reference this sight mark, or the sight tape, and dial my sight accordingly. I can choose which side of the sight tape the tick marks are on. I can choose whether I want 1-yard increments or 2.5-yard increments. I can adjust the 1-yard / 2.5-yard increments with the slider. I can adjust the 5-yard increment with the slider. I can remove the 0 from the numbers and adjust the number size to my liking. Up top, you'll notice there's two blue buttons. The first is to generate the printout for the 8.5 by 11 desktop printer, and then access to our dual tape build. The orange buttons you see here, the orange text, saves an image for either the D30 label printer or the Epson label printer, and those will be saved to your photo gallery as long as the permission has been granted. Let's talk about dual tape next.
Pro Archery Ballistics, where sight tapes are as easy as pin to peep, arrow to peep. Once you have those entered in the device, you're all set.
Let's talk about dual tape, a great function of the app. You can access dual tape either from the More tab or directly from the sight tape page. In dual tape, you'll have the option to select the sight that you're using, select the build numbers that you want to reference. Keep in mind that the build numbers must be for the same bow, so your sight radius and peep to arrow measurements should be identical, and also both arrows need to be able to tune out of the bow without making adjustments to the bow. Once we select our two inputs, we'll hit the blue Calculate Tape button. This will generate a side-by-side sight tape formatted to 1/4 of an inch wide that we could print out to use two arrows at the same time. Or we can use this as a reference. If we have one of these tapes on our bow, we can use the other to know where we should put the sight for that second arrow. We can also use the red line, which is generated from this text field. This is the approximate maximum distance that we could shoot given our parameters. In this box, you want to add up the distance from the lowest pin to the bottom of the housing, plus half the diameter of your arrow shaft, and the height of your fletching if you're going to shoot odd vein up.
Get ready for the future. Making moves past yesterday. Get ready for the future. Only nothing in our way. And I'ma take you places you ain't never seen.
We're on the More tab here in the app. Let's go through all these fields. So the first at the top, we have a notes page. This is a simple notes column that you can add as many notes as you would like. Advanced setting below this allows us to customize our drag coefficient or truing our mass velocity, as you'd hear in rifle ballistics. This is truing our curve to our specific build. We can also change or input our sight intensity here. We can enter an elevation instead of using our pressure, temperature, and dew point values, and this will give an estimated density value based on that elevation. Or if you're planning ahead, you could change this and print off a secondary sight tape for a higher elevation shoot. Next, we have an arrow build comparison. This allows us to compare the ballistic values of any arrow from 0 to 70 yards. And that compares the downrange ballistics. Next, we have that access to dual tape that we talked about previously. We have our sight mark table, which for any build and sight that we select, we can generate a table of sight marks from 1 to 140 yards. This table is printable with the blue button, as shown here, for quick reference and those tournaments which do not allow phones. And then we have our bow tuning assistance, which is currently in development. That'll have a whole slew of features for helping you fine tune or maybe diagnose a problem that you're having with your bow. We have an arrow spine suggestion calculator as well as arrow details. There's a green toggle in here such that if you don't know the arrow shaft you're going to use, but you do know an approximate FOC you're going to build to, and if you don't know, just select something common such as 10 to 15%, and this will give you a suggested arrow spine. The arrow spine suggestion is based on your bow, so you'll need your IBO rating, your draw weight, your draw length, your brace height, and the length that you're going to cut your arrow to carbon. Those are critical details to determine what spine we would suggest for your setup. If you're going to add more detail, you can build an exact arrow using the arrow's GPI, tip weight, insert weight, fletchings, weight per vein, knock weight, and wrap weight to again generate a suggested arrow spine based on those parameters. The calculator will also tell you your approximate FOC percentage, your total arrow weight, and an estimated velocity based on your inputs. After that, we have another secondary access to the input with marks. We have our partnership page, which will be coming soon with discounts and other promotional deals. And then last, a contact us. If you have any problems with the app, you can reach out by email by clicking the orange email and generating an automatic draft email. You can go to our Instagram or YouTube tutorials directly from Contact Us. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions in the app, please reach out anytime. Or if you need some help, we're here for it all.
Don't play around, cover much grounds, got game by the pound. Getting paid is a forte, each and every day. True play away, I can't get her out of my mind.